All right, so we're diving into Yesterday by the Beatles.
Right.
And, you know, this is such an iconic song
Yeah.
that we thought it'd be fun to kind of look at it
Yeah.
through the lens of another culture.
Okay.
So we're looking at the Spanish Wikipedia entry of Yesterday, and I think you're going to find some really interesting things that we found.
Yeah.
You know, everybody knows the story of
Sure.
Paul McCartney waking up
Uh-huh.
with this fully formed melody in his head.
Yeah.
But what I found fascinating was
Okay.
he was actually so insecure about it
Really?
that he spent like a month
What?
playing it for other people, being like,
Wow.
have you heard this? Is this an original melody?
Yeah, like, is this mine?
Yeah.
Did I steal this?
Exactly. And I just thought that was so fascinating.
Yeah, that is interesting.
That, like, he would be so insecure about
it makes you wonder, like, where creativity comes from.
Yeah.
Like, was that really his, or did it come from somewhere else that he didn't even realize?
Totally. And I was also really interested to learn about how the other Beatles reacted to it.
Yeah.
They weren't really into it at first.
Oh, really? Wow.
Yeah, because they felt like it was too soft.
Oh.
And it didn't really fit their rock and roll image.
Gotcha.
And George Harrison even kind of made fun of Paul McCartney for it.
What'd he say?
He was like,
Yeah.
he's always talking about that song.
Yeah.
You'd think he was Beethoven or somebody.
Yeah.
So, like, they weren't really into it
Huh. Interesting.
at first.
Okay.
And to that point, it wasn't even released as a single in the UK at first.
Oh, wow.
It was just on the album.
Huh.
So,
That's pretty wild.
Yeah.
For such a famous song.
I know. It makes you wonder, right? Like, would it have had the same impact
Right.
had it not been
Yeah.
released as a single?
Totally.
Okay, so then let's talk about, like, the recording of it.
Okay.
Because this is also really interesting.
Yeah.
This is the first time
Yeah.
that a Beatles song
Mm-hmm.
featured only one member of the band.
Oh, wow.
So it was essentially a Paul McCartney solo song.
Okay.
And the instrumentation is very simple.
Okay.
It's just him on acoustic guitar
Uh-huh.
and a string quartet.
Interesting.
And one of the things I thought was interesting was that one of the string players
Uh-huh.
was a Spanish cellist
Oh, wow.
named Francesc Gabarró.
Okay.
And I'd never heard of him.
Yeah, I'm not familiar.
But apparently he had kind of a bluesy style
Oh, cool.
to his playing.
Yeah.
And do we know, like, how he got involved in this?
You know, I'm not sure, but I think it was probably George Martin
Okay.
who was the producer on that.
Gotcha.
So I would imagine he was the one who brought him in.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I'd love to learn a little bit more about his contribution to this song.
Yeah, me too. So, you know, I don't know a ton about, like, cello playing styles.
Okay.
But I do know that Francesc Gabarró had a very, like, warm, expressive sound to his playing.
Okay.
And you can actually hear it in the way that he sustains certain notes and adds a little bit of vibrato.
Okay.
So it does contribute to that feeling of, like, longing and heartbreak that you get from the song.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's so interesting how these, like, tiny details can make such a big difference.
Absolutely.
And this is another thing that I found really interesting.
Okay.
Apparently, he declined royalties for his work.
Oh, wow.
He was just happy
Really?
to get his £5 session fee.
Wow. For a song that went on to be one of the most popular songs of all time.
I know, £5. That's crazy. Yeah.
That's wild.
So let's talk about the impact
Okay.
of Yesterday.
Yeah.
You know,
It's a global phenomenon.
huge.
For sure.
It's been covered by so many artists.
Yeah.
And I thought it was really interesting. The Spanish Wikipedia entry
Uh-huh.
talked about how
Yeah.
Yesterday might have actually been subconsciously influenced
Really?
by the Mexican bolero Bésame Mucho.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And, you know, I'd never really thought about that before,
Uh-huh.
but it's totally possible.
Yeah.
I mean, the Beatles obviously were exposed to a lot of different
Yeah.
types of music.
Yeah, definitely.
And I thought it was interesting, too, that Yesterday wasn't even released as a single in the UK at first.
Right.
So they weren't really thinking about
Yeah.
global domination or anything like
Yeah,
that.
it kind of became a phenomenon
Right.
organically.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So tell me more about this bolero.
It's connection.
So Bésame Mucho was already a global hit
Okay.
by the time the Beatles were starting out.
Gotcha.
And it had been recorded in a bunch of different languages.
Oh, wow.
and it was super popular all over the world.
Okay.
So it's very likely
Yeah.
that the Beatles would have heard it at some point.
Okay.
And when you listen to the two songs, they
Yeah.
both have kind of a similar, like,
Yeah.
melancholic feel.
Yeah.
They both deal with themes of love and loss,
Mm-hmm.
and they even have a similar chord progression.
Oh, wow.
So it's easy to see how
Yeah.
they could be connected.
Yeah, like subconsciously, even if Paul McCartney wasn't thinking about it.
Exactly, yeah.
And did the Beatles ever actually perform?
You know, it's funny you should mention that.
Yeah.
There are recordings of them
Oh, great.
performing Bésame Mucho
Wow.
from, like, their early days
Shut up.
in Hamburg.
Really?
Yeah. So
It's definitely a possibility.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
So they were really, like, absorbing all these different...
They were like sponges.
Yeah,
Yeah, soaking up
that's so
all
good.
these different influences.
I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked about the origin of the song.
Yeah.
We've talked about the recording of it.
Uh-huh.
We've talked about
Yeah.
the global impact,
The Bolero connection.
the Bolero connection.
Yeah.
What else should we...
Well, I think it's worth talking about like the structure of the song
Okay.
and what makes it so adaptable
Yeah.
to all these different interpretations.
Right, because it's been covered by,
Yeah.
like, everybody.
It's been done in every style imaginable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is it about the song?
Well, I think it's partly
Yeah.
the melody.
Okay.
That opening phrase is just so recognizable and
Yeah.
so memorable.
Yeah.
But I also think there's a depth to the chord progression that
Okay.
allows for a lot of harmonic variation.
Gotcha.
So different artists can
Yeah.
add their own like flair
Okay.
to the song
Okay.
by changing the chords or
Yeah.
adding different instrumentation.
Okay.
And then of course the lyrics are also really important.
Yeah.
They're simple but profound.
Yeah.
And they deal with these universal themes
Yeah.
of love and loss and nostalgia.
Totally.
Yeah.
So how did the Beatles actually
Okay.
perform this song live?
So they actually kept it really simple.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I was imagining, like, a
Yeah.
whole string quartet.
I know, right? A whole orchestra.
Yeah.
But no, it was just Paul McCartney
Oh, wow.
by himself with an acoustic guitar.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's powerful.
Yeah.
And do we have any recordings?
Yeah, there are
Yeah.
definitely recordings out there,
Oh, cool.
both audio and video.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm going to have to check that out.
Yeah. Definitely worth checking out.
And so they performed it live for a while,
They did for a while.
but then they eventually stopped.
Yeah, their last live performance of Yesterday
Okay.
was in 1966
Gotcha.
at Candlestick Park.
Wow.
It was their final tour.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do we know why they stopped playing it?
You know, I think it was partly just because they were tired of touring,
Okay.
but they were also evolving as artists, and I
Yeah.
think they were ready to move on from Yesterday.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's interesting that they embraced it
Yeah.
for that period of time.
Yeah.
When it was so different
Yeah.
from what they were doing.
Yeah, it shows that they weren't afraid to
Really?
experiment and try new things.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that makes Yesterday so special.
Yeah.
Is that it's been able to evolve
Yeah.
through all these different interpretations.
Yeah.
And that's kind of what we're going to talk about next. It's
Oh.
like the legacy of Yesterday.
All right, sounds good.
Okay, so
Yeah.
I think we've covered like
Yeah.
pretty much everything about Yesterday.
I think so. It's amazing how much there is to say
I know, right?
about such a seemingly simple song.
Yeah, and you know, one thing I've been thinking about is like,
Yeah.
how was this song received
How would you
by critics?
Yeah,
You know, because obviously fans love it.
right. Yeah.
But like, what did the critics think?
You know, it's funny you should mention that
Yeah.
because it wasn't universally loved
Oh, really?
by critics.
Huh.
Yeah, some critics actually found it to be too sentimental,
Really?
too sappy,
Ah.
too far removed from
Oh.
the Beatles' rock and roll roots.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Do we know, like,
Bob Dylan famously was not a fan.
what did he say?
He basically said that you could find a million songs, like Yesterday in the Library of Congress.
Ouch.
Yeah, basically implying that it wasn't that original or groundbreaking.
Wow, coming from Bob Dylan.
I know, right?
That's a tough.
Kind of a burn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder if he.
I mean, who knows?
Yeah.
Maybe he changed his mind.
Right. Because it has
Yeah.
stood the test of time.
It really has, yeah.
Okay, so,
Yeah.
you know, we talked about earlier how
Yeah.
the other Beatles didn't really
Right.
want to release this as a single.
Yeah, they were not into it.
So my question is,
Yeah.
what if they had gotten their way?
Oh, that's a good question.
Yeah.
Like, what if it had just stayed a
Right.
album track?
Yeah, would it have had...
I mean, it's impossible to know,
Yeah.
but it definitely wouldn't have had
Right.
the same reach.
Right.
I mean, the fact that it was released as a single
Yeah.
meant that it was played on the radio.
Right.
It was covered by other artists.
Yeah.
It was used in movies and TV shows.
Yeah.
So it really took on a life of its own.
Totally. Yeah.
Beyond just being...
It transcended the Beatles almost.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
It became something more than just a Beatles song.
Wow.
Yeah.
This has been so fascinating.
It really has.
I feel like I have a whole
Yeah.
new appreciation
Me
for
too.
yesterday.
Yeah, you start to realize
Yeah.
how much depth there really is to
Yeah.
this song.
It's like we peeled back
I like that analogy.
the layers of an onion.
Yeah, like a musical onion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for those of you listening at home,
Yeah.
go back and listen to yesterday.
Give it another listen.
Think about all the things we talked about.
Yeah.
Think about Besame Mucho
Yeah.
and all these different influences.
The connection.
Yeah. And let us know